If you're looking for the best handheld for under $100, in my mind, it's without a doubt the Retroid Pocket 2S. And the Retroid Pocket 2S is actually a lot more powerful and capable than a lot of people think. So in this video, we're going to explore everything the Retroid Pocket 2S can give you for under $100. So let's check it out. And already with the box, we have a pretty premium feeling look. It just comes with the basics. We have our manual, a charger, and then the handheld itself, and that's it. The Retroid Pocket 2S has been out for some months now, so the design might be somewhat familiar. They've made other handhelds before this. It looked very similar or almost identical. So there's nothing too new with the design, but I find it really unique looking, and I actually really like it. Some people don't like the screen placement, but I actually find it kind of cool. So we have a 3.5-inch 480p screen. It's a touchscreen because this is an Android handheld. Of course, on the right, we have our A, B, X, Y buttons, which I really love the colorful look of. And of course, there are other colors you can get. There's a lot of them actually, and I'm going to talk more about the different models because there's some that have different specs and come at different prices. But I decided to go with this color because I found it the coolest looking. Towards the end of the video, when I'm talking about my likes and dislikes, I'm going to mention one thing about the buttons, but for now, I'll just do a basic overview. And then we have our D-pad over on the side, and I really love the D-pad. It kind of has a PS Vita feel. It's more clicky, and I don't have any problem with it whatsoever. I find it to be really accurate. You're not getting many accidental diagonals or anything like that if that's a common burden for you. I didn't really find it to be happening at all on here, and a lot of times I don't notice it too much, but on here especially, it seemed to be a very good D-pad. And then we have our two Hall stakes, which is really great because a lot of cheaper handhelds do not come with Hall stakes, so these feel really, really nice, and I really wish they were more common on cheaper handhelds. And up top, we have our start and select buttons, and then down there on the bottom we have our Android control buttons, and then we have two front-facing speakers. Then we have our shoulder buttons, which have a nice clicky feel, which I love, as well as analog triggers, which can be really, really useful for certain games that take advantage of them. For example, racing games where you don't want to press it in the whole way. You can't do that here, and it registers everything great. Not a ton of games are going to take advantage of that, but for the ones that do, it's a really nice feature to have. And again, some similar handhelds in this price range do not have analog triggers. I would say most don't actually, so that's certainly a welcomed addition. And up top we have our power button, our volume buttons, as well as a USB-C port, and then our HDMI out. And then on the bottom we have our micro SD card slot, which is actually not necessary, although it's probably recommended, especially if you want to put a lot of games on here. But we do have internal storage on this handheld, so it's not absolutely necessary, as well as our headphone jack. The overall build quality is pretty good. It's not as heavy as other premium handhelds, but it actually feels pretty adequate to me. I didn't pick it up and think, whoa, this thing is really light. It's just about normal. It could be a little heavier if you're into that kind of thing, but I didn't find it to be really bad or cheap feeling at all, and the overall build is pretty good as well. Again, it's not the most premium feeling thing I've ever felt, but for $100 I find it to be perfectly acceptable. So when you first turn it on, it's an Android handheld, so there's going to be more of a setup to be done, connecting to Wi-Fi and maybe connecting to a Google account. They're going to prompt you to install certain emulators if you want, which you can, or you can just download them separately yourself, which I decided to do. And because the Retroid Pocket 2S doesn't come preloaded with any games or BIOS files, you're going to have to bring those over yourself as well. So that's one thing that's worth mentioning. But after all that, you're good to go. And then you can decide if you want to use the Retroid launcher or just use the standard Android experience. Of course, you can just switch between the two whenever you want, or you can use a separate front end like Daigisho, which is completely free, which is really easy to set up, and I like the look of a little more than the Retroid launcher, but they both actually look really cool to be honest, so I wouldn't fault you if you decided to use the Retroid launcher because it comes preloaded. That's up to you, and again, you don't even have to do that at all if you don't want. You can just download your emulators through Google Play and launch them like a standard Android app. So now let's take a look at the emulation. So when it comes to 8-bit, 16-bit era consoles, as well as older handhelds, you're going to have no problems whatsoever. For example, Game Boy Advance is going to be great on here, no issues whatsoever. That's not going to be super surprising. You can play SNES, it's perfectly fine, it looks great, and yeah, no performance issues. PlayStation 1 works very well. You can even play 3x resolution with minimal performance drops. I think everything at 3x will work well. From what I understand, 3x isn't that much of an improvement from 2x when it comes to PS1, so I would say if you want to just play everything at 2x resolution, that's going to work perfectly well for you, and you're not going to encounter any slowdowns whatsoever. At least I would really, really be surprised if you did. And by the way, there are multiple performance modes on this handheld. All of my testing pretty much was done on the extreme setting, which will drain your battery a little faster, it will make things heat up a bit, and that's not necessary for these lower end handhelds. So for a lot of these, you could probably just keep it unbalanced, and I'll leave that to you to switch around for what you find is good and playable. I think for most of these, the extreme setting is absolutely unnecessary. I'm just saying that I used it on here so you can kind of gauge what you can do and not think that it can be improved from this because it's on the max setting. And it's the same with N64 and Dreamcast. They both run perfectly fine, no issues there whatsoever, which is a really nice breath of fresh air because I'm so used to checking out these budget handhelds, and I say for almost every single one of them, it can play some N64, it can play some Dreamcast, but some of the higher end stuff isn't going to be super great in run. That's for the other budget ones, but here on the Retroid Pocket 2S, you're going to have no problems with anything on the N64 or Dreamcast that I can think of, so yeah. And then we have 3DS emulation, so 3DS is pretty good. I would say certainly some 3D games will experience some slowdown. For example, in Mario Kart 7, certain parts of the track will be good, and then there will be some slowdown, especially when the shaders are loading in or compiling or whatever you call it. At those points, and I think you can see it on the video you're going to be seeing now, there will be some slowdown, but I wouldn't expect Mario Kart 7 to be playable all the time. It's not going to be flawless, but a lot of the 3D games, while there might be some slowdowns, I would say generally are playable, but a lot of games like platformers or even lighter 3D games will be perfectly playable, so a decent amount of 3DS games are going to be good on here. And then I want to move up to Gamecube. So I would say a lot of the Gamecube's library is playable on here. Certainly for some there will be some slowdown, but I would say most games absolutely will be playable, and that's again a really nice step up from a lot of budget handhelds. I'm pretty surprised that for $100 we're getting pretty good Gamecube performance, because for other handhelds you're going to be paying like $20, $30 less. They could not even dream of touching any Gamecube games, and here we're actually getting a lot of Gamecube, so I'm really happy with that. And then we have PlayStation 2 emulation, which isn't really super great for a lot of games. Absolutely in certain games I was really surprised with how well they played with really minimal slowdowns, some probably not at all. So yeah, absolutely some PlayStation 2 games will be really great on here, but when it comes to higher end games, yeah, they're just not going to be super great. And of course, fiddling around in the settings, you can get a lot of improved performance, and I had to do that with these games, and actually even lowering the resolution on some to 0.75 or even on 0.5 for some games, which really does not look good. And I guess depending on who you are, that could be playable, but I know for a lot of people that just is absolutely awful, and you couldn't bear to play a game for more than a few minutes on half resolution. And I'd imagine even certain games on 0.5 resolution would not be playable either, so keep that in mind. This is not a perfect portable PlayStation 2. I wish it was, but it isn't. But the thing that was the most surprising to me was actually the Wii emulation. So here I am playing Mario Kart Wii on the Retroid Pocket 2S, and as you can see, it's really surprising, but it's actually playable for a lot of tracks. And to be honest with you, I really get frustrated with emulating the Wii. The controls can be kind of annoying to set up, but even once you do set it up right, it's kind of annoying sometimes to have to deal with working around the intended use of a Wii remote. But for the games that do work and are more easy to play and less aggravating, quite a few of them are actually playable and a lot better than you would think they were. Definitely a lot better than I thought they were. In a way that this can actually be made a lot better, which is what I'm using right now, is by lowering the resolution in the game. And from what I can tell, in the most recent version of the Dolphin emulator, you can't do this. I could be wrong, so if you can, let me know. But when I tried it, it didn't work, and I haven't seen anyone else online that had success doing it. I may have just missed it, but I'm using the Dolphin MMJR emulator, which is an older version, and I think most people have abandoned it. It's the version that I found I was able to lower the resolution in. So the way that you do that is you just have to go into the game settings in the main menu of the emulator, and then increase the resolution to like 4x or whatever, it doesn't matter, and then save it. And then you're going to need to download a text editing app onto your handheld, or you could probably do it on your PC as well. And then open up your Dolphin MMJR files, find the specific file for the settings of that game, and then go down to where it shows your resolution, and you can change it, for example, to 75 for 0.75x resolution, and then save it. And then you open up your game, you'll see that it's changed. You have to do that game by game for what I can tell, because certain games might need a lower resolution or might need it a little higher, again, depending on which game you're talking about. So you can actually get a pretty decent amount of Wii games played on here. I'm sure there's a lot that cannot be played, absolutely, but for the ones that you can, I would say look at this as a bonus, like a lot of people talk about in these handhelds. It's not going to be one of those things where I would consistently go to my Retroid Pocket 2S for Wii emulation, but for the ones that are playable on here, I find this way better than I expected. I hadn't seen anyone showcase Wii emulation on here before. I actually saw a post on Reddit from a Spanish YouTuber showcasing Wii emulation on here, and that's what really sparked my interest in trying this out. And I'm using some of the settings that he showed, as well as him mentioning that he lowered the resolution, which is something that I wasn't sure that you could actually do in Dolphin, and now I know you can. So big shout out to him. I'm going to link his video down below in the description if you want to see the exact settings he's using, and you can draw some inspiration from that and maybe change up a bit here and there when you want, because it's not exactly for the Retroid Pocket 2S, but I'm pretty much using everything that he showed in that video. And I haven't mentioned PSP yet, so PSP is really good on here as well. I don't do a ton of PSP emulation myself because I never had one when I was a kid or anything. anything, but PSP is going to be perfect on here in terms of performance. On the screen, it's pretty small and doesn't look great, but in terms of performance, it's actually really good. So if you don't mind playing in such a small window, or even stretching it, I haven't tried that yet, but if you want to stretch it, I'm sure you can, and that'll make it a little better, but obviously stretched out. So you can decide if you like that, but PSP is really good on here and much better than other budget handhelds, even just $10, $20, $30 cheaper. It's absolutely night and day for how much better this is than those handhelds. So for under $100, I absolutely love the Retroid Pocket 2S, and there's pretty much nothing else in this price range that comes near it. There's other handhelds that are a little more expensive that you can get better performance on, and there's other handhelds that are a little bit cheaper that come pretty close, but I think the Retroid Pocket 2S in the under $100 or near $100 range is absolutely unparalleled and the champion right now, in my opinion at least. So I already mentioned earlier, there are a few different models that come at different prices. So there's the 3GB of RAM model with 32GB of internal storage, and that comes in at $89.90 on the Retroid website. And then there's also the 4GB of RAM model with 128GB of internal storage, and that comes in at $99.99. And that's the model that I'm using right here, the 4GB model, because to me, just to get that extra 1GB of RAM for $10 is worth it. It might not make too much of a difference in terms of performance, but it'll probably make things around Android feel a little bit more snappy, and even if you can get somewhat of a boost in performance just for $10, I think it's absolutely worth it. And unfortunately, Retroid does charge for shipping, so you might expect to pay like $10 or $15 shipping. So if you get the model that's $89, it's going to come out to be about $100 or somewhere very close to that. Or if you get the $99 4GB model, you're going to be paying about $110 or $115 after shipping. So I really wish it was free shipping, but you can keep your eye out on other third-party sellers that might have sales. You can get it for a bit cheaper here and there. There actually was a price drop recently, so it was not under $100 before, and now it is. So that was a nice change. We can now call it a sub $100 handheld. So when it comes to anything else in this price range, or even a little bit less, if you're thinking about getting a handheld like maybe the RG35XXH, it's absolutely a great handheld, but if you want to spend a little bit more money, get the Retroid Pocket 2S, you do get a lot of improvements. You get Hall sticks, you get Android and a touchscreen if you like Android. I know some people don't, but you do get that if you like it. You get analog triggers, you get a really nice feeling D-pad, Hall sticks, as well as much better specs, which have completely mastered N64, Dreamcast, PSP, which handhelds like the RG35XX Plus or the RG35XXH come close to, but don't have perfect performance in these consoles. I don't need to rehash everything else I mentioned earlier, but of course, you get a lot of Gamecube, some PS2, some Wii, some 3DS. A lot of this stuff you can't get on these other budget handhelds. If those features are important to you and you have it in your budget to spend a little bit more money and get the Retroid Pocket 2S, I would absolutely say it's worth the upgrade. So what I like about this handheld is of course the price, the performance, the controls. The controls are really great. The only thing I don't love about the controls is the buttons, the ABXY buttons. They're not bad. I'm not going to say they're bad buttons, but for some reason they just don't feel the best to me. There's no problem with them where I'm playing a game and I accidentally press the wrong button or something doesn't register. By no means. It just doesn't feel the best for some reason. That's just kind of a nitpick. If I'm really just trying to over scrutinize things, I would say the buttons could be a little bit better, but they're really fine. But the great D-pad, Hall sticks, really nice shoulder buttons, analog triggers really make up for that, so I'm not going to complain about the controls at all. To be honest with you, there's very little that I don't like about this handheld actually, especially considering the price. To me, it's just a no-brainer. If you have about $100 to spend on a handheld and you're looking around, I think the Retroid Pocket 2S should absolutely be one of the top contenders, and in my mind, the top contender. But other people have certain features that they value more than others, so maybe another handheld might have that, might have compromises in other areas that you don't care about too much. So of course, a lot of this is personal preference, but I just find in certain objective categories, nothing in this price range comes above what the Retroid Pocket 2S gives you. So again, if you're interested in buying this handheld, I'll put some links down below in the description for you to check out. And if you enjoyed this video and want to see more retro handheld reviews like this one, I'd really appreciate it if you could leave a like and subscribe. I'll see you in the next video. Have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.